Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready to dive into a topic that's really got people talking. Electric vehicles. Are they just a fad? The future of driving? Or something in between?
It's a question more and more people are asking themselves, especially with all the buzz around gas prices and climate change.
And you've clearly been doing your research. You sent over some fascinating stuff, including this evi.txt file.
Yeah, that one really breaks down the different types of electric vehicles out there.
Exactly. And it's not just Tesla anymore, right? I mean, this excerpt mentions BMW, Hyundai, even Chevrolet is getting in on the action.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
seems like every major car manufacturer is trying to figure out their place in this electric revolution.
It's a whole new ballgame. So let's break it down. We've got two main contenders here. All electric vehicles, your AEVs, think Tesla, and then there are plug-in hybrids, the PHEVs, kind of like a bridge between gas and electric.
Right, and the article makes a really compelling case for the efficiency of those AEVs.
Yeah, that number blew me away. Apparently, AEVs convert like almost 3 times more energy from the battery into actually moving the car compared to those gas guzzlers.
It's a huge difference. Imagine filling up your tank but only using a third of the fuel and the rest just disappearing. That's essentially what's happening with traditional combustion engines.
Wow. And of course, less reliance on fossil fuels means a smaller carbon footprint,
Right.
right? Better for the environment, better for the air we breathe.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation in that regard, especially as we transition to more renewable energy sources to charge those batteries.
Speaking of charging, get this. The source says that for the price of a gallon of gas, you could basically drive an electric car across most states. That's wild.
It is impressive how much further you can go on electricity compared to a gallon of gas. And even with fluctuating gas prices, long-term, running an EV is going to be cheaper.
Plus, think about the performance. Those electric motors are silent, they're smooth, no more clunky gears or oil changes. It's a completely different driving experience. But okay, let's be real, there've got to be some downsides, right?
Of course, no technology is perfect, and the source definitely acknowledges those. Range anxiety is a big one.
Yeah, how far can you really go on a single charge? The source says most AEVs get between 60 to 120 miles. Now that's not bad, but it's not exactly a cross-country road trip either.
It does require a different mindset. Planning your routes around charging stations, factoring in charging time, those are all things you have to consider.
Especially since even with those fast chargers popping up, it still takes longer to juice up your car than it does to fill up a tank of gas.
That's something to keep in mind. Though maybe it's an opportunity to slow down a bit, take a break, grab a coffee while you wait. Think of it as a forced relaxation period.
I like that, turning a charging break into a self-care moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but there's another, perhaps even bigger, elephant in the room. Cost. EVs are expensive.
That's true. The upfront cost can be a deterrent for a lot of people, but that's where it gets interesting. The source argues that we need to look beyond that initial sticker price.
Okay, so what other factors should we be considering?
Well, we've already talked about lower fuel costs, less maintenance, but beyond that, EV batteries are becoming incredibly durable. They last for years, covering hundreds of thousands of miles. Plus, there are often government incentives, tax breaks, things like that, that can really offset that initial purchase price.
Right. So it's not just about what you see on the lot, it's about the bigger picture, the total cost over the life of the vehicle. Okay, so we've got this picture of AEVs. They're efficient, they're environmentally friendly, but maybe a little anxiety-inducing when it comes to range and cost. But what about those PHEVs, those hybrids that are trying to strike a balance between gas and electric?
Maybe they're the best of both worlds. Let's see what the source has to say about that.
So PHEVs, plug-in hybrids, they're like that friend who wants to have a little bit of everything, right?
Right.
A taste of the electric life, but with a safety net of gas.
Yeah. They're all about flexibility, that's for sure. Like, remember how we talked about range anxiety with the AEVs? PHEVs are trying to address that. You can zip around town using just the electric motor,
Yeah.
doing your part for the environment, but then, boom, you've got that gas engine ready to go if you need to head out on a longer trip.
No range anxiety there, but I'm guessing there has to be a catch, right? It can't be all sunshine and roses.
Well, you're right, there are always trade-offs. The source points out that, and this is kind of surprising, charging times for PHEVs can actually be longer than for AEVs.
Wait, longer? That seems counterintuitive. Why would that be?
It's all about the battery, right? PHEVs, they've got smaller batteries because they don't have to rely on them as much. They've got that gas engine to back them up. And because the batteries are smaller, sometimes the onboard charger isn't as powerful. And what happens when you have a less powerful charger? Yep, longer charging times.
Huh, makes sense. And I'm assuming smaller battery probably also means less range in electric-only mode.
You got it. You'll still see those fuel savings. and you'll definitely pollute less, which is great. But yeah, you won't be going quite as far on just the battery alone compared to a fully electric car.
Okay, so longer charging time, shorter electric range.
Mhm.
Anything else? Because I think the source also mentioned something about PHEVs maybe having higher maintenance costs down the line.
Right, they did. And here's why. PHEVs are a bit more complicated under the hood. They've got both the electric motor and the traditional combustion engine, so it's like having two cars in one. But that also means there's more that can go wrong, potentially leading to higher repair bills as the car ages.
So it's all about trade-offs. You get that flexibility, you dodge that range anxiety, but you might end up paying for it in other ways. Charging time, range, even those dreaded mechanic visits.
Exactly. Plus, let's not forget about that initial sticker price. PHEVs, they might be a bit friendlier on your wallet compared to fully electric cars, but they're still going to cost you more than a comparable gas-powered car.
Right, cost is always a factor. PHEVs, it's complicated. They seem like the perfect compromise at first, but it's clear there's more to the story.
Absolutely. And this is where I think the point the source makes about the electric vehicle market just like exploding becomes really relevant. We're seeing more and more car manufacturers jumping into the game. And what does that mean for consumers? More competition, more innovation, and hopefully lower prices down the road.
Competition is always a good thing. Pushes everyone to be better. Though I guess it also makes choosing a car even harder, right?
Yeah.
Because with all these new models and features coming out all the time, how do you even begin to pick the right one?
It can be overwhelming, no doubt. But this is where I think a little bit of future-proofing comes in handy. The source, they really hit on this idea of thinking about your needs, not just for today, but for, say, the next 5 years, maybe even 10 years down the road.
That makes total sense. Like, I'm not buying a new phone just based on what I needed to do today, right? I want something that's still going to be relevant and useful a few years from now.
Exactly. So think about it. Will your commute change? Will your family grow? And will you need a bigger car? Maybe you're planning on those epic cross-country road trips we were talking about earlier.
And what about the technology? I mean, self-driving cars, they're not just science fiction anymore. Are we all going to have robot chauffeurs soon?
It's definitely a possibility. And charging infrastructure, that's changing so rapidly too. What seems like a limitation today might be a total non-issue in just a couple of years. Remember that whole range anxiety thing? Imagine if charging stations were as common as gas stations are now.
Okay, well, my head is spinning now, but in a good way. It's exciting to think about all the possibilities. But I also think it's important to acknowledge our listener who might be feeling a little overwhelmed right now. Choosing the right car, it's not as simple as it used to be. It's not just about comparing miles per gallon anymore. It's charging times, range, technology, the whole package. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But I also think that's what makes this such a fascinating time to be car shopping. It's not just about buying a car anymore. It's about investing in the future of transportation. A future that's more sustainable, more efficient, and yeah, maybe even a little cooler.
I'm definitely getting those electric dreams now.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we get too carried away with the future of transportation, there's one more thing we need to touch on, the environmental impact. We hear a lot about how EVs are better for the planet. But is it really that simple?
That's such an important point, and one that I think often gets lost in all the excitement over the new tech. I noticed the source briefly mentioned it, but it's crucial to consider where your electricity is actually coming from. Like, if you're charging your fancy new electric car with power generated by a coal plant, well, you're not exactly shrinking your carbon footprint, are you?
Right. It's like, buying all organic produce, but then driving home from the store in a gas-guzzling Hummer. It kind of defeats the purpose. It's like
I
we're
think
trying to solve one problem, but accidentally creating another one somewhere else.
Exactly. We can't just focus on what's coming out of the tailpipe. We've got to look at the whole picture, the entire life cycle of these vehicles, from the moment those raw materials are mined to the day that car finally reaches the scrapyard.
So it's bigger than just gas stations versus charging stations.
Yeah.
It's a whole system that needs to be rethought.
Absolutely. And a big part of that is the environmental impact of actually making those batteries. They don't just like magically appear.
Right. There's a lot that goes into those batteries. Mining, manufacturing. What's the impact of all that?
That's a critical question because mining those materials, lithium, cobalt, all those rare earth minerals, it's not always pretty. There can be serious environmental and social consequences, and that's something we have to be honest about as the demand for electric vehicles just keeps skyrocketing.
It's not just about the car. It's about the entire supply chain, the whole network that supports it.
Totally. And that takes us to another big question. What happens to those batteries when they're done? They're huge. We can't just toss them in the landfill. That's a whole other environmental mess waiting to happen.
So what do we do with them?
Well, the good news is recycling technology is advancing like crazy. We're getting better and better at recovering those valuable materials from used batteries, which means less mining, less waste.
Okay, so there's hope for a closed-loop system. We're not
Yeah.
just endlessly digging up the planet. But it sounds like this is an area where the tech is still catching up, right?
It's a work in progress for sure, but it's
Yeah.
something to keep in mind when you're weighing your options. It's not as simple as just looking at the car itself. We've got to think about the bigger picture.
It's like we're not just choosing a car, we're choosing a whole new philosophy of transportation.
Now you're talking. It's a mindset shift.
Mm.
And it might even inspire us to explore other ways of getting around. Hop on a bike, take a walk, maybe even give public transportation a try.
Now you're speaking my language.
Ah.
I'm all for a good walk. But for those times when you absolutely need a car, it seems like we need to be asking some tough questions. Where does our electricity come from? What happens to the battery when it's done? What are my transportation needs going to be in the future?
It's all about being informed, figuring out what matters most to you. And those priorities, they might change over time, right? As technology evolves, as our lives change, we've got to be flexible.
This is why I love our deep dives. We start with what seems like a simple question in this case, what type of car is right for me? But it always leads to all these other fascinating, interconnected issues.
It's all connected. And once you start pulling on that thread, you realize it's about so much more than just picking a car. It's about understanding these complex systems and making choices that align with our values, both for ourselves and for the planet.
So well said. For our listeners who've been on this journey with us today, what would you say are the key takeaways?
Yeah.
What should they be thinking about as they navigate the exciting, sometimes overwhelming world of electric vehicles?
The first thing I'd say is don't be afraid to challenge those old assumptions about what it means to own a car. The rules are changing, electric vehicles are here, and they're changing the game, but they're not a magic solution. There are trade-offs, and it's important to be realistic about those.
It's not one size fits all.
Exactly. So do your homework. Figure out what's important to you, what your needs are, and don't be afraid to ask tough questions. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to make a decision that's right for you.
And remember, what's right for you today might not be the perfect fit 5 or 10 years down the road. So stay curious, stay informed, and be open to new possibilities as this whole landscape continues to change.
Well said. Buckle up, everyone. It's going to be an exciting ride.
It sure is. And on that note, we'll wrap up this electrifying deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little inspiring. Until next time, keep those engines humming and those minds curious.